My father disowned me for failing the bar exam because I tarnished his name. His golden children destroyed his honor instead. My father called me into his office the day the bar exam results came out. He already knew I'd failed before I did. He had connections at the state board who told him early. He didn't ask if I was okay or what happened. He just slid a typed letter across his mahogany desk. It said I was no longer his son, and I had 1 week to leave his house. He said the family name meant something in the legal community, and I'd tarnished it by failing the bar after he'd paid for 7 years of education. He actually used the word tarnished, implying that we were like silverware that needed polishing. My brother Nathan was already a partner at Dad's firm. He'd passed the bar on his first try 5 years earlier. Dad threw a party for him that cost $20,000. He invited every judge and lawyer in the state. He gave a speech about Nathan carrying on the family legacy of legal excellence. Nathan stood there smiling in his custom suit while Dad called him the son who made everything worthwhile. My sister Lydia passed 2 years after Nathan. Another huge party. Another speech about family pride. Dad bought her a Mercedes with a vanity plate that said, "Lawyer One." She didn't even practice law. She married a senator's son and played tennis at the country club. But she'd passed the test, so she was still worthy of being family. I'd studied for 8 months. Took every practice test. Hired tutors with my own money because Dad said I should figure it out myself like Nathan did. Except that Nathan had Dad's personal coach and all his old materials. Nathan got to study full-time while Dad paid his expenses. I worked nights at a warehouse to pay rent because Dad charged me to live at home after graduation. The day I failed, Dad changed the locks. Mom stood behind him crying but said nothing. Nathan helped pack my stuff and said maybe trade school would be more my speed. Lydia posted on social media about how not everyone was cut out for greatness, and that was okay. She actually used my failure as a motivational post about appreciating winners. I moved into my car. Dad had co-signed it during college, but it was in my name, so he couldn't take it. I showered at the gym and applied for jobs from coffee shop Wi-Fi. Nobody would hire a law school graduate who failed the bar. They all assumed something was wrong with me. I finally got a job at a title company doing document review. Mindless work for minimum wage, but it was something. That's where I met Robert. He owned a real estate investment company and needed someone who understood contracts. He didn't care about the bar exam. He cared that I could spot issues in purchase agreements. Within 6 months, I was managing his commercial acquisitions. He taught me about real estate law from the business side. Turns out you don't need to pass the bar to understand property deals. You just can't represent clients in court. I was good at it. Really good. I started my own property investment company with Robert as a mentor. Used my legal knowledge to find loopholes in zoning laws that let us buy cheap land and flip it for commercial development. My first deal netted $200,000. I didn't tell my family. Nathan, meanwhile, was struggling. He'd been skimming from client trust accounts to fund his gambling addiction. Dad had been covering for him for years, replacing money before audits. But the state bar started investigating after a client complaint. Nathan needed $3 million to avoid criminal charges. Dad mortgaged everything. The house, the firm, his retirement. He called it protecting the family name, the same name I'd tarnished by failing one test. Lydia's husband divorced her after finding out she'd been having affairs with her tennis instructor and her personal trainer. She tried to hide assets during the divorce but got caught. The judge sanctioned her for fraud. The state bar opened an ethics investigation. Dad paid another fortune for her lawyers. She ended up suspended for 2 years and lost everything in the divorce. Dad's firm started hemorrhaging clients. News about Nathan's theft and Lydia's fraud made everyone nervous. Junior associates quit. Partners withdrew their capital. Dad called asking if I could help with a loan. He said blood was blood. I reminded him about the letter disowning me. He started laughing and said, "You're not going to fail me for the 3rd time, right?" I hung up and sat there in my car outside the strip mall property I'd just closed on. Dad's laugh kept playing in my head like a broken record. The way he said it, like asking me for money, was some kind of joke we were both in on. My hands shook when I gripped the steering wheel. 3 years ago, he threw me out with a typed letter, and now he wanted me to save his perfect children from their own mess. I pulled out my phone and called Robert before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything, the words coming out fast and angry. Dad needed money to cover Nathan's theft and Lydia's legal bills. He actually had the nerve to ask if I was going to fail him for the 3rd time. Robert stayed quiet while I talked, just listening like he always did. When I finished, he said something that stuck with me. He said I didn't owe anything to people who threw me away like trash. That helping them wouldn't change who they were or earn me the apology I deserved. He was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. The next 2 days were torture. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to Dad's phone call. Part of me was furious at his entitlement, at how he could disown me 1 minute and beg for money the next. But another part of me, this pathetic, hopeful part, wondered if maybe this crisis could lead to something real between us. Maybe if I helped them, they'd finally see I wasn't the failure they'd labeled me. I hated that I even thought that way. On the third day, I decided to do some digging before making any decisions. I needed to know exactly how bad things were, not just Dad's version where everything was a simple mistake. I started with Nathan's case. The State Bar website had public complaint files and I spent hours reading through them. What I found made my stomach turn. Dad had said Nathan made one mistake, that he borrowed from a client account during a rough patch. That was a lie. Nathan had stolen from at least 8 different client accounts over 3 years. He'd set up a whole system to hide it. He'd take money from one client's trust account to cover another, always staying one step ahead of the audits. The amounts kept getting bigger. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. The complaint file laid it all out in black and white. Dates, amounts, client names. Some of these people were elderly clients who trusted Nathan with their life savings. One woman had dementia, and Nathan stole her money while pretending to manage her estate. Reading that made me feel sick. This wasn't some gambling problem that got out of hand. This was calculated theft over years, and Dad had known. The documents showed Dad had covered shortfalls multiple times before the State Bar caught on. Then I looked into Lydia's case. Dad had made it sound like she just hid some assets during her divorce, something lots of people try to do. Wrong again. The judge's written order was public record, and I read every page. Lydia hadn't just hidden assets. She'd forged her husband's signature on financial documents. She'd lied under oath during depositions about bank accounts and property she owned. She'd transferred money to fake companies she'd set up to hide it from the divorce proceedings. The judge used words like deliberate fraud and pattern of deception. He wrote that Lydia had shown a complete disregard for the truth and the legal system. The State Bar investigation found even more. She'd falsified continuing education credits for 3 years, never attending the required training courses, but submitting fake certificates. She'd been playing tennis at the country club during hours she claimed to be in legal seminars. Yet Dad still called it all a misunderstanding, like she'd just made an innocent mistake. 3 days after the first call, Dad called again. I could hear the difference in his voice right away. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something close to panic. He said the firm was losing clients faster than he expected. 2 more partners had pulled their money out. He needed an answer about the loan. I told him I needed to understand the full situation first. That set him off. He started yelling about how I was being petty, holding grudges when family should stick together in crisis. I pointed out that he'd decided I wasn't family 3 years ago. He said that was different, that I'd embarrassed him, that Nathan and Lydia were facing real consequences. Like losing my home and sleeping in my car wasn't a real consequence. The call ended with him demanding an answer by the end of the week. I met Robert at our office the next morning. I spread out all the documents I'd found on the conference table. The bar complaints, the court orders, the investigation reports. Robert went through them slowly, reading every detail. When he finished, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. He said Dad was asking me to fund the consequences of choices he'd enabled for years. That the same man who called me a failure for one test result was now begging that failure to rescue his legacy. He asked me what I thought would happen if I gave Dad the money. Would Nathan suddenly become honest? Would Lydia stop lying? Would Dad apologize for throwing me out? We both knew the answers. Robert said the only thing that would change is I'd be broke, and they'd still be the same people they'd always been. My phone rang while we were sitting there. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Mom. Her voice was shaking, so bad I could barely understand her at first. She said she was sorry, that she should have stood up for me when Dad threw me out, that she'd been wrong to stay silent. She said she'd been watching me succeed from afar, hearing about my business through mutual friends. She said she was proud of what I'd built without their help or their name. I didn't know what to say. For 3 years, I'd written her off as just another enabler, someone who chose Dad's cruelty over her own son. Now she was apologizing, and I felt completely off balance. We talked for over an hour. Mom told me things I'd never known. About how Dad had controlled everything in their marriage, how she'd lost herself trying to keep the peace. Then she said something that shocked me. She had her own savings account that Dad didn't know about. She'd been setting aside money for years, just small amounts he wouldn't notice. She said she'd been too scared to leave before, but watching what happened to me had changed something in her. She saw clearly for the first time how Dad destroyed anyone who didn't fit his perfect image. She said she wasn't sure if she had the courage to actually leave, but at least now she knew she had the option. The money was there if she needed it. I told her I'd help her if she decided to go, that she could stay with me until she got on her feet. She started crying and thanked me. We agreed to meet for coffee the next week, just the 2 of us. That night I got an email from Nathan. It was long, full of excuses about his gambling addiction and the stress of living up to Dad's expectations. He said he never meant to hurt anyone, that the clients would be made whole through Dad's mortgage on the house and the firm. He went on about how addiction was a disease and he was getting help now. But nowhere in that whole email did he apologize to me. Not once did he acknowledge helping pack my stuff into my car or telling me to try trade school. He just assumed I'd help because we were brothers and that's what brothers do. Like the past 3 years hadn't happened. Like he hadn't stood by while Dad destroyed me over a test score while he was actively stealing from vulnerable clients. I read that email 3 times looking for any sign of real remorse or acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. There was nothing. Just excuses and assumptions that I'd come running to save them all. I opened my laptop and typed a single line back to Nathan. "Do you remember helping me pack my stuff into my car after Dad changed the locks?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message showed as read within minutes, but no reply came. Hours passed and still nothing. I checked my phone obsessively for the rest of the day, but Nathan stayed silent. That silence felt better than any apology he could have written because it meant my point had landed exactly where I wanted it to. He knew what he'd done and couldn't find words to defend it. The satisfaction was cold and hard in my chest. 2 days later, I was walking the perimeter of a commercial lot we'd just acquired when a black SUV pulled up to the construction fence. The vehicle looked expensive, one of those luxury models with chrome trim and oversized wheels. Lydia climbed out wearing designer workout clothes, the kind with subtle logos that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had on sunglasses that probably cost what I used to make in a week at the title company. The SUV had temporary dealer plates. She walked toward me smiling like we were old friends meeting for lunch. She started asking questions about my business, looking around at the property with fake interest. She said she'd heard through mutual acquaintances that I was doing well in real estate. She kept touching my arm and laughing at things that weren't funny. Then she said she always knew I'd land on my feet, that I was too smart and driven to let one setback keep me down. She said it like she'd been rooting for me all along, like she hadn't posted on social media about how my failure was a teaching moment about appreciating winners, like those words hadn't followed me through the worst period of my life when I was living in my car and showering at the gym. I pulled my arm away from her touch. I told her I remembered her social media post word for word, that I'd seen it while sitting in a coffee shop using their Wi-Fi to apply for jobs that wouldn't hire me. I asked her if she remembered writing that not everyone was cut out for greatness, and that was okay. If she remembered using my lowest moment as content for her followers. She stepped back and her smile faltered. She said I was being too sensitive, that it wasn't personal, that she was just trying to be inspirational and I was taking it the wrong way. She said we were family, and she was going through a really hard time right now with the divorce and the bar suspension. She asked if I couldn't just let the past go and help her out since she'd always supported me. I almost laughed at that last part. Instead, I told her to leave my property and not come back. She stood there for a moment looking shocked, then got in her SUV and drove away. That afternoon, Robert called me into the conference room. He had papers spread across the table, financial projections and site plans for a massive commercial development downtown, a medical complex with retail space and office buildings. The numbers were staggering. We'd need to commit every dollar of available capital and all our attention for at least 6 months. Robert walked me through the analysis. The profit potential could triple our company's value if we executed it right. But it required total focus. No distractions, no divided attention, no family drama pulling me away from critical decisions. We sat there looking at those numbers, and I knew this was the choice. Keep getting sucked into my family's problems, or commit to building something real that was actually mine. I got a call 3 days later from a guy I knew who worked in the prosecutor's office. We'd gone to law school together and stayed in touch. He asked if I knew my brother was facing serious criminal charges. I said I knew about the bar investigation, but that was it. He told me the amount Nathan stole put him over the threshold for felony embezzlement. Multiple counts. Dad had been calling the prosecutor's office daily trying to negotiate a deal, offering full restitution, character references, anything to keep Nathan out of jail. My contact said the prosecutor wasn't interested because Nathan had stolen from vulnerable clients over multiple years. It showed planning and intent, not just one mistake. The state wanted to make an example of him. My phone rang that night and Dad's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He started yelling before I could say hello. He said he knew I'd been digging into Nathan's case, asking questions, checking public records. He accused me of trying to sabotage my own brother instead of helping the family in crisis. I let him finish his rant, then asked why he was angry at me for reading public documents instead of being angry at Nathan for stealing from clients. I said maybe if he'd held Nathan accountable years ago when the problem started instead of covering for him and replacing stolen money, it wouldn't have gotten this bad. Dad said I didn't understand the pressure Nathan was under or what it meant to protect the family name. I hung up on him mid-sentence. The formal notice came 2 weeks later. The state bar suspended Nathan pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. He couldn't practice law or work at Dad's firm anymore. Dad had to send letters to all of Nathan's clients explaining that their cases were being reassigned to other attorneys. I heard through the legal community that several clients fired the firm entirely when they got those letters. Nobody wanted their case handled by a firm where the partner had been stealing from client trust accounts. The firm's reputation was collapsing and taking everything with it. I drove to the courthouse on the day of Nathan's preliminary hearing. I told myself I was going just to see it with my own eyes, to watch consequences finally catch up to the golden child. I sat in the back row of the courtroom while Dad and Nathan's expensive lawyer argued for leniency. Nathan wore a suit that probably cost $5,000 and kept his head down. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s who looked tired and angry. She presented evidence of Nathan's gambling debts, casino records, credit card statements, loan documents. The total was over $400,000, way more than the $3 million Dad had told me about. She showed how Nathan had systematically stolen from 8 different client accounts over 3 years, always taking amounts small enough that he thought nobody would notice right away. The judge's face got harder with each new piece of evidence. After the hearing ended, I stood in the courthouse hallway looking at the marble floors and wood paneling. Dad came out of the courtroom and spotted me immediately. He walked over fast with his face red. He asked why I was there if I wasn't going to help. I told him I was watching his golden child finally face reality. That maybe if he'd held Nathan accountable years ago instead of covering for him and enabling his worst impulses, we wouldn't be standing here. Dad said I was being cruel and vindictive. I said I was being honest and walked away while he was still talking. The news about Lydia came through official channels a week later. Her bar suspension had been made permanent. The investigators found she'd falsified continuing education credits for 3 years straight. She never attended the required training courses. She just submitted fake certificates while spending that time at the country club with her tennis instructor and personal trainer. The Bar Association's report said she showed a pattern of dishonesty that made her unfit to practice law. I thought about her Mercedes with the Lawyer 1 vanity plate and wondered if she still had it, or if that was gone too along with everything else. Mom's text came through 3 days later, asking if we could meet for coffee. She'd never texted me before. She didn't even have my number until recently when she must have gotten it from someone. I agreed and picked a small cafe across town where nobody from Dad's legal circles would see us. She walked in looking smaller than I remembered, wearing jeans and a plain sweater instead of the expensive outfits Dad always insisted she wear to maintain appearances. The exhaustion on her face had nothing to do with lack of sleep. It was deeper, the kind that comes from carrying weight for too long. We sat down and she ordered black coffee, no sugar, which surprised me because she always drank it with cream and 2 sugars. I asked if she was okay and she laughed, but it sounded hollow. She said she'd been living in a prison of Dad's expectations and judgments for 30 years. Every decision filtered through what he'd think, what it would look like to his colleagues, whether it met his standards for the family image. She talked about watching him throw away his son over a test score and how something finally broke in her ability to pretend everything was fine. She'd spent decades enabling his toxic behavior, standing silent while he destroyed relationships and crushed people under his need for status. She apologized again for not defending me when he changed the locks, for choosing his approval over her own child. I told her I understood it wasn't simple, that Dad's control was suffocating and she'd been trapped in it longer than anyone. She cried quietly into her coffee while other customers pretended not to notice. She said she had savings Dad didn't know about, money she'd been setting aside for years in case she ever found the courage to leave. I asked what was stopping her now, and she said fear, habit, the terror of starting over at her age after building her entire identity around being his wife. We talked for 2 hours, and when we left, she hugged me tight and thanked me for not turning her away after everything. I made my decision that night sitting in my apartment looking at the commercial development contracts spread across my desk. Dad called the next morning and I let it ring twice before answering. I told him I wasn't giving him money, but I would help Mom if she decided to leave him. The line went silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said I was just like he always thought, selfish and vindictive, willing to watch my own family suffer to feed my ego. His voice had that same cold edge it carried the day he handed me the disownment letter. I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice steady. I told him he was the one who decided I wasn't family anymore when I failed his test, and I'd simply taken him at his word for the past 3 years. He sputtered about how that was different, how I'd embarrassed him in front of his colleagues and peers, how Nathan and Lydia were facing real consequences while I was being petty about hurt feelings. I let him finish his rant, then said his firm failing and his golden children facing justice wasn't my problem to solve. The only family member I was interested in helping was Mom if she wanted out. He started yelling about loyalty and blood and family obligation. I told him those words meant nothing coming from someone who threw away his son over one exam result while spending hundreds of thousands protecting thieves and liars because they passed a test. Dad hung up on me and I sat there holding my phone feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight I'd been carrying around, that desperate need for his approval and validation, just evaporated. I didn't need anything from him anymore. Nathan's plea hearing happened 6 weeks later. I didn't plan to go, but Robert convinced me I'd regret missing it. We sat in the back row while Nathan stood before the judge in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His lawyer presented the plea agreement for felony embezzlement in exchange for 18 months in county jail and 5 years probation. Dad sat in the front row looking like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him. His face was gray, and the confident posture he always carried was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and trembling hands. Nathan cried while apologizing to the judge about his gambling problem, like that somehow excused stealing from vulnerable clients who trusted him with their money. The prosecutor stood up and listed each victim by name, describing how Nathan had taken their settlement funds and divorce payments to feed slot machines and poker tables. One elderly woman lost her entire divorce settlement. A disabled veteran lost his injury compensation. Nathan kept his head down through all of it, tears running down his face while Dad stared straight ahead, refusing to look at anyone. The judge accepted the plea, but made it clear she found Nathan's conduct despicable and his remorse questionable. She said the only reason she agreed to the deal was because full restitution had been made, though she noted that restitution paid by others didn't demonstrate genuine accountability. Nathan was ordered to report to county jail in 2 weeks. Dad tried to approach me in the hallway after, but I walked past him without stopping. The firm closure notice went out 2 weeks after Nathan's sentencing. The malpractice insurance company dropped their coverage, citing the criminal conviction and ethics violations. Remaining clients fled the scandal, not wanting their cases associated with a firm where the partner stole from trust accounts. Dad sent emails to everyone on his contact list trying to explain, trying to salvage something, but nobody wanted to touch him. 30 years of building a legal reputation destroyed because Dad valued the appearance of success over actual integrity or accountability. He'd enabled Nathan's gambling for years, covered up the thefts, replaced stolen money before audits, all to protect the family name. But protecting the name without addressing the rot underneath just meant everything collapsed harder when the truth finally came out. I heard through former colleagues that Dad was trying to sell the house to cover remaining debts. The mortgage he'd taken out to pay Nathan's restitution was crushing him, and the firm's closure meant no income to service it. Everything he'd built was gone, and he had nothing to show for it except 2 children facing criminal and ethics sanctions, and a 3rd child who wanted nothing to do with him. Mom called me on a Tuesday morning and said she'd filed for divorce. Her voice sounded stronger than it had at the coffee shop, more certain. She'd moved into a small apartment using her secret savings and told Dad she was done enabling his toxic obsession with status and watching him destroy everyone around him. He'd tried to convince her to stay, promising things would be different, but she said she'd heard those promises for 30 years and nothing ever changed. She thanked me for giving her courage to finally leave, for showing her that life existed outside Dad's shadow. We started having weekly dinners at her apartment, just the 2 of us, rebuilding the relationship we should have had all along. She talked about taking classes at the community college, about making friends who didn't care about her husband's legal reputation, about discovering who she was outside of being Mrs. Harrison. She seemed younger somehow, lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight that was finally gone. I helped her set up her apartment and watched her laugh at things that weren't even that funny, just enjoying the freedom to laugh without worrying what it looked like or who was watching. 6 months passed and the commercial development deal finally closed. Robert called me into his office and showed me the new company letterhead with both our names on it. He said I'd earned full partnership through the work I'd put in and the deals I'd closed. My name was on the door now, my actual name, not some legacy I'd inherited or reputation I had to live up to. I was building something real based on actual merit rather than family connections and status. Mom came to the small celebration dinner Robert organized, and she looked genuinely happy for the first time in years. She'd started taking art classes and made friends with other women going through divorces and life changes. She told stories about her painting instructor and the coffee shop she'd discovered and the book club she'd joined. She was discovering who she was outside of Dad's shadow, and it was beautiful to watch. I realized sitting there that failing the bar exam was the best thing that ever happened to me because it freed me from a legacy that was rotten at its core. Nathan was in county jail serving his sentence. Lydia was working at a retail store because nobody would hire a disbarred lawyer, and Dad was living alone in a rental apartment, still bitter about how his children had failed him. Meanwhile, I had a successful business, a real relationship with my mother, and the knowledge that everything I'd built was mine because I'd earned it, not because someone handed it to me or because I passed the right test at the right time.